Hello and welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate? Hello and welcome back to the Radiate Wellness Podcast, to Radiate Mystery with Colm Holland, who is the author of The Secret of the Alchemist and was on this podcast a couple of years ago, if you may remember, but also the author of the new book called By Accident Most Strange, If Thoughts Could Kill, a psychological thriller and mystery. Welcome back, Colm. It's so good to see you.
Lovely to see you again, Christy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I noticed behind you on the wall, those who are watching on YouTube, you've got the artwork from The Secret of the Alchemist.
Yeah, that's the original artwork.
Yeah, that's
well spotted.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
last time we spoke on this podcast, you were talking about The Secret of the Alchemist. And we start just with a brief conversation about that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I love the book, The Alchemist.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about writing this book, The Secret of the Alchemist, there were three things that were foremost in my mind. One was I didn't want to write about my own life, which has been quite extraordinary in some ways. So I thought, well, that's a good topic. And I started to write that book and it was boring. Even I found it boring. So what's everybody else going to think? So, okay, that wasn't going to work. So then I thought, well, what were the main things that happened to me during my life? And one of the key pivotal moments was my encounter with Paulo Coelho and my publishing of his book, The Alchemist, which is, I don't know, 600 million copies sold in 75 languages. And so that I thought that's getting a bit more interesting. And then I realized that nobody in all the years, so this is like 30 years after he published The Alchemist, nobody's actually ever done a critique on it. There's never been any literary criticism or explanation or trying to look inside the book. Nobody's ever done it. So I thought, well, why don't I have a go at that? Let's give that a go. And then I also thought, well, I'm also a student of Carl Jung. I'm doing a master's degree in Jungian studies at the moment. So I thought, why don't I bring that in as well? Because that explains the connection between human psychology and alchemy. Because Carl Jung studied alchemy for the last 30 years of his life because he felt that it reflected in his mind, the most accurately how he thought the psyche works. The paradoxical opposites of the psyche. And so I said, okay, let's give it a go. So I put all three into one book, The Secret of the Alchemist. As you can see, there's the artwork. I put it all in and it just came together. For me, it was a real joy to see how these three threads, as it were, just interwove. So for 3 years, my book, The Secret of the Alchemist, was in the top 100 Amazon in 20th century literary criticism.
Fantastic.
I know, number one for 3 weeks, in the top 10 for like 3 months, and then every now and again it comes back into the top 100 as people buy the book. So I feel like I've done the world a bit of a service, really explaining the psychological elements within The Alchemist, which are not that difficult to understand, really. I mean, ultimately, The Alchemist is the hero's journey.
Right.
But if you're going to start talking about the hero's journey, you can't not talk about Carl Jung, because he was the one who really highlighted the hero's journey. That was his invention. So that was a major archetype. So then I talk about archetypes, and then we talk about the transformation or the transfiguration or the transmutation of base things into treasure. What Carl Jung said, and this is what I emphasize in the book, and this is really what Paulo's The Alchemist is about, is that the things that we despise the most about ourselves, the things we think about ourselves that are of the least value, and we just want to repress them and push them down, and we just wish to God they didn't exist. Please don't remind me of these things about myself. What Carl Jung discovered and what the alchemists were trying to do in their laboratories is if you can transmute those elements of the human psyche, if you can face them and bring, in my case, I use the chemical of unconditional love into the experiment. So if you can bring unconditional love to bear on the parts of the psyche that we despise the most, they will become your greatest treasure. They will become the things that you realize are the most important to you, give you meaning, give you purpose, give you a sense of identity. When all the falsehoods and all the personas that we've created over the years just fall away, especially in middle age, when all those things begin to crumble, then one of the options we have is to turn and face and look at the things that we've suppressed. In my case, I use the symbol of an inner child. So for me, I was able to personify all of those aspects of myself that I despise into a younger version of me. And that's how I dealt with it. So I started to have conversations with the younger me when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And that was a transformational experience. So that really is the secret of the alchemist, is finding the treasure within. And you'll find it, according to Carl Jung and according to Paulo Coelho, and apparently according to me, you'll find it in those parts that we despise the most, the things we think are of no value at all. Though that's where it actually lives.
Right. The book is a very important look into Paulo Coelho's work and a very important critique and pulling together of the major themes. So I would encourage anybody to listen to that episode. I wish I had the episode number right in front of me, but any episode that you have done, any discussion you have done of that book, I think is an important one to listen to. Also, just seeking the book, The Secret of the Alchemist, on Amazon or wherever you find books. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about your new book. This is a departure for you. Accident Most Strange. This is like a thriller. And
Yeah.
so what's it about?
I'll give you some secret background information. Just don't tell anybody else, except everybody watching this podcast.
Right. Your secret's safe with me. I won't tell anybody.
So I was interested to see what was lurking in my own unconscious. It was inspired by Carl Jung. I don't know if you're aware, some of your listeners might be aware, but maybe not. So I'll just tell you briefly. When Carl Jung was in middle age, he had up to that point spent many years working very closely with Sigmund Freud. And the two of them were like, best buddies. And for various reasons, which I won't go into, that collapsed, that relationship completely cratered badly, and huge animosity between them. And I don't know if they ever spoke again, but they were best friends and worked on lots of psychological projects together, shared notes, shared speaking platforms, and so on. And as a result of that break, Carl Jung went into a massive nervous breakdown, which lasted about 2 years.
Oh.
But it was an interesting nervous breakdown because he made a decision to allow it to happen. He knew he was troubled. He knew that the breakup with Sigmund Freud had caused all of this sort of departure from everything that he had ever believed in, really. And he was trying to reform his own philosophy of psychology. And he would get up in the morning and he would be normal and he would have breakfast with his kids at home. And then he would go into his office and then he would just invite his unconscious mind to reveal itself. And it turned out to be pretty horrific and quite graphic. And there's a book called The Red Book, in which he records all the symbols and the images that he had and all of the characters that appeared in his mind. And he did this for a couple of years. That was his job. So what he said was, I'm doing a scientific experiment on myself. And then when he'd finished exploring his unconscious mind during the day, he'd go home again, have dinner with his kids and just, relax in the evening as if nothing was going on at all. Quite incredible, really. So I thought, what's in my unconscious that I've not ever decided to come to terms with? And I thought, well, maybe if I just start writing fiction, let's see what happens. because one of the things that Carl Jung did advocate was if you want to know what's going on in your unconscious, just start writing, write poetry, do some improvised drama. And in his treatment sessions, that's what he'd get people to do. He'd get them to write, or he'd get them to tell stories, and he was just fascinated of what was going to come out of people's unconscious. So I thought, let's give it a go. I'll start writing. And the plot was initiated by a real event. This is the secret, everybody. A real event that I witnessed in my 20s, where some people I knew, you would never recognize them in the book, but some people I knew managed to relieve a multi-millionairess of her wealth. True story. And I thought, oh, I like that. And that came out of my unconscious. I thought, oh, you haven't dealt with that, Colm, have you? You haven't really come to terms with it. You want to talk about it. I thought, okay, let's use that as the foundation of the story.
The launching place of the story.
And so I invented these two people who bear no resemblance to the actual people. So you'll never figure it out. And let them do their worst, as it were. So my main character, what I thought I'd play with is my main character is a psychic. I have to admit, I was partly inspired by an English writer, which you may or may not have heard of, called Dame Hilary Mantel, who wrote a book about a psychic called Beyond Black, which became a bestseller all over the place. And I really liked her treatment of the inside mind of a psychic. And I thought, let's take that one step further. What if this psychic is also a psychopath?
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go. Yeah, where did that come from?
Oh, wow.
So I had to sort of start making friends with what I ended up calling my inner psychopath. What wouldn't he do to get what he wanted? What wouldn't this guy do? So he changes his name. He starts off, he's Irish, and he changes his name to a French sounding name, Jean Patrick, and he invents a persona and he befriends this multimillionairess. And in the process, there is a wonderful female character called Carmen, whom he accidentally meets. But Carmen has only one goal in life, and that is to make as much money as she possibly can, as quickly as she can, without having to work for it.
Noble goal.
So, yeah. Oh, I don't know anybody like that. That's an interesting thing. All right, yeah. The two of them get together, and it works, but at what cost? At what cost? And I won't do any spoilers. So that's where it started. And then I thought, I've got more in me here. So I tell that story. And I thought, how about part 2? So what about if JP gets involved in something completely different? So he's still a psychopath, and he's still got to deal with people who get in his way, which really upsets him, by the way. If you get in his way, then yeah, you better watch out. And then I wrote that, so that's part 2, and then which is set in. So the first book is set in Mallorca, which is a Spanish island in the Mediterranean, beautiful holiday island, which is where Agatha Christie used to go and stay at a hotel.
Nice.
Yeah. So it begins at the hotel where Agatha Christie used to stay, which is a real hotel. And book 2, part 2, is set in Saint-Tropez, where I love. It's a place I love and been there many, many times. And it's also where Brigitte Bardot made her most famous movie, which was called And God Created Woman.
Yeah.
So I've got JP getting involved with a bunch of people who sail. Oh, look, there's a sailing boat. Who sail from Mallorca to Saint-Tropez during the making of the film And God Created Woman, which became a huge international box office winner. I mean, it made millions, and it put Brigitte Bardot on the map. There's quite a few episodes of Brigitte Bardot not wearing very much, if anything at all. So I think that helped with its success. And then the final thing, part of the book, is set in an Italian lake called Lake Maggiore, where I was actually there last week. Can you believe? Some friends of ours said, oh, we're coming over from Australia. We're going to Italy. Do you want to meet up in Italy? I said, where in Italy? And they said, northern Italy. And I said, well, why don't we meet on Isola Bella, which is a beautiful island in the middle of Lake Maggiore. So that's what we did last week. What I'm going to do once my paperback version comes out, which will be by the end of this month, what I'm going to do is blog. I've got photos of all these places, and I'll just blog behind the scenes. Why Lake Majori? Why they're here? Why they're, But there's lots of stuff going on in the book. So it's always the main plot, and then there's a subplot, and then there's a subplot, and they all intertwine. It seems that my brain quite likes to have more than one thing going on at the same time. So
You mention book 2, and your Amazon page talks about
yeah.
Accident Most Strange. How many books have you planned out already?
Well, I've got 3 books on the go. So book 2 is called Particular Accidents Gone By. So if you're wondering where these titles are coming from, they're coming from Shakespeare. I take no credit for the title. These are Shakespeare's words. So he wrote a play called The Tempest, whom the main character is a guy called Prospero, who is an alchemist.
Mm-hmm. I love The Tempest. It's one of my favorites.
There you go. So he says, and I quoted it at the beginning of my book, by accident most strange hath mine enemies brought me to this island. So that's where that one starts off. And then this book 2, Particular Accidents Gone By. So the consequences of JP's psychopathic activity in book 1 is now going to have ramifications back onto him in book 2. So he's now going to pay the price for his own dirty deeds, as it were.
Oh, wow. Now, the subtitle of the first book is If Thoughts Could Kill. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers, but
No, we can talk about it without spoiling it. Yeah.
Good. Yes. So what does that allude to? The Women in Podcasting Awards are an international People's Choice style of awards event, and we would love your vote. I'm Christy Clemens Hoffman, the host of this podcast you're listening to right now, and I'm up in 3 categories. First, the Health, Wellness, and Fitness podcast for the Radiate Wellness Podcast, what you're listening to now. Also, Faith-Based Podcast for Real Life Angel Encounters Podcast. Also, as Favorite Expert Guest. Again, that's me, Christy Clemens Hoffman. I would love your vote. Voting is open until October 1st. Please go to womeninpodcasting.net/vote to cast your vote. And thank you. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to ask you a few simple favors. First of all, please rate, review, and share this podcast wherever you're listening. It sounds like a simple little thing, and it is, but it has a huge impact for us because it helps other people find us in the podcasting algorithms. I don't know how it works, but I do know that it helps a lot. Next, if you would subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, whether that's YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you're listening, just hit subscribe or follow, and that helps you and it helps us. It helps you because then you receive notifications when we have a new episode that's out. It helps us because, again, algorithm magic, I don't know what happens, but it helps. And then finally, you can support our podcast in a tangible way by going to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast and then click on support the show. Now, we have a new feature too. We are now on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon. You can also find the link to Patreon when you go to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast. So on Patreon, for $3 a month or $5 a month, you can support your metaphysical and spiritual growth. You can learn about upcoming guests, and you can get early and ad-free versions of the shows. So please support us. This podcast is free for you to listen, but we have costs, and quite frankly, they come out of my pocket. So if you like this content, if you get a lot out of it, please see what you can do to give back. Thank you so much.
So let's go back to Carl Jung again just for a moment. Carl Jung invented a persona in his psyche called Mercurius. And into Mercurius, or Mercury, or Merlin is another name for this character, into this persona, he dumped all of the things that he considered were unsavory about himself. So the part of himself that would get what he wanted without worrying too much about the cost to anybody else, as it were. Mercurius is sometimes aligned with the trickster, the archetype of the trickster as well. If he needs to pull a trick to get what he wants, he'll pull a trick. And Jung went to the extent of saying, well, we've all got two sides to our psyche. We've got what he calls now the Mercurius side to our psyche, but we've also got the Jesus side, love and light. So we've got love and light on the one hand and deviousness and trickster stuff going on the left. And he said that not until we acknowledge the existence of both halves of our psyche can we be whole. If you don't acknowledge the mercurius side of your psyche, it will play tricks on you. It will control you. And if you want a good example of that, then those people who are nearest and dearest to you, who just say one thing and trigger something in the mercurius side of the mind, which ends up with you exploding in anger. I mean, none of your listeners ever have any experiences like this, I'm sure. So Carl Jung would say, you've got to face that stuff. You've got to come to terms with it. And it's that meeting of those two halves. He even said, taking some words from Faust, actually, he even said that he has two souls. He even says, two souls, alas, is how I have to live. I've got these two opposing parts of my psyche. And the trick I've found, he said, is to give both equal attention. And by giving them equal attention, then I'm able to live a more balanced life. So better to know your dark side than not know it. Own up to it rather than try and deny it. It can get awfully tricky if you don't. So in my book, I'm trying to explore that. So if you like, JP is my Mercurius. Yeah, JP, the character, Jean-Patrick, is my Mercurius, and I'm giving him free rein. Now, what's interesting about him, and this is, again, is not a spoiler, he never actually physically, personally murders anybody, but he wants to. He wants them dead. He wants them gone. He wants them out of the way. So that's the thought, you see. Thoughts could kill. And what he's discovered is, because he's psychic, he's got sort of psychic powers, is that all he has to do is find the intent. If he can find the intent for this person's demise, guess what? Chances are they're going to cop it somehow, somewhere. It may not be him who does it. So that's the intrigue. So that's the little twists in my book, is once you get in the flow and you realize that he's not actually going to murder him, now you're guessing, how's this person going to die then?
The same thing. It's like you're privy to his internal thoughts. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, where's this going to go? Who's going to get it next?
Yeah,
How much research did you do into psychopathy and the whole persona of a psychopath?
Yeah, I mean, a psychopath lives in a state of psychosis, so they've lost touch with reality.
Right.
They could still function, though. That's what's fascinating about the psychopath. A schizophrenic, my deepest sympathies go out to anybody listening who suffers from schizophrenia. The schizophrenic, of course, has episodes of psychosis and then comes back and quite often doesn't know. But whereas a psychopath, in my experience, 9 times out of 10, they know they're a psychopath and they live it out in some way, one way, shape, or another. Not to be confused with a sociopath. A sociopath is somebody who has no empathy for anybody else. So they do something and everybody goes, oh, I can't believe you did that. That's terrible. That's awful what you just did, But nobody dies, but lots of people get hurt. So that's a sociopath, because the sociopath doesn't understand why people feel hurt. It wasn't me that did that, surely. No, it can't be. So they're unaware. Whereas a psychopath wants the demise, is quite happy to see the demise of whoever. And of course, serial killers, to say that a serial killer isn't aware of what they're doing, I think it is a misjudgment. I actually think they are. Yeah, they do know what's going on.
Now, I'm no psychologist, but I would have to agree to that. Now, your book is getting some wonderful reviews. This book puts you on the edge of your seat and wanting more. I can see that.
Yeah.
JP is the psychopath you'll feel sorry for. Well, sometimes. Plot twists and turns and keeps you guessing to the end. So it's already available on Kindle, right?
Yeah, there's a Kindle version, but there is a paperback coming very soon.
It's exciting. Now, before we started recording, we talked a little bit about going the self-publishing route, going the Amazon publishing route, because you have a lengthy relationship with publishers. I mean, your first book came from a publisher.
Yeah.
For a publisher. Why did you to go this route this time?
The world of publishing has changed completely from when I worked in publishing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
used to be in
Yeah.
publishing as well.
Yeah, it's not. I have been a publisher and retired from that quite a few years ago, actually, before the online shift. I actually thought the internet would be the demise of books. And ironically, it's not. There's more books being published every year ever since the internet. So go figure that one out. But being published by an established author, which my first two books, The Secret of the Alchemist, but I also did a book where I edited a book of a guy who sadly passed. I republished it and re-edited it called The True Origins of Jesus,
Mm.
which looks at the mythology of the Christ mythologies that came together to produce what we now know as Christianity. And they were both published. I was quite happy. But I thought with fiction, I could waste probably the next 10 years of my life trying to find a publisher. And even if I did find one who wanted to publish my fiction, then you're looking at 18 months to 2 years before they get around to it once they've signed. So I thought I'd just go ahead and have a go myself. It's a steep learning curve. Anybody listening who's had a go at self-publishing on Amazon, you'll know that once you start getting into page trim sizes and front and back cover, wraparound covers, and pagination and so on and so on. I now realize why we had so many good editors at HarperCollins who were quite happy to do all that stuff. That wasn't my thing at all. So I've had to learn the more laborious side of getting a book out there, as it were. My favorite bit, though, is actually doing the creation, actually coming up with great ideas and stuff that entertains people, really.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you've got plans in the works for more books in this series. Do you
Yeah.
have plans for any other books?
Yes, but I can't say I've actually ghostwritten a couple of books in the last 2 years because I'm the ghostwriter. I can't promote them as me. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of ghostwriting, one autobiography, which is going to be amazing when that comes out. That was a real privilege to work on that. Actually, great stuff. I'm actually working in the background on a cult expose, which is in, yeah, I know, ooh, yeah.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, somebody really well known.
Oh my.
Oh, I know. I can't wait to get stuck into it.
Right.
What we're thinking of actually starting a crowdfund. So when I got that crowd, there are so many survivors of this cult. I mean, we're talking thousands of people worldwide who have had to come out and gone through multiple therapies to try and get their lives back, as it were. The irony is, though, that this particular cult leader is still operating. This isn't an old story. This is a current story. We're just in the process of conceptualizing that book. So, yeah, I'm busy already researching and considering how we're going to approach that in a way that is still entertaining, but also will help. Hopefully, well, it's hard to believe that you can help people who want to join cults. I actually think you can't. I think if they're going to join, they'll join. There are too many parts of the human psyche that a charismatic cult figure leader appeals to. And it's not until there's enough pain really experienced by those people in the cult, until they've experienced all the pain, it's really hard for them. They have to make the decision to leave. They're not, there's nothing you can really do. But for those who have left, hopefully this book will bring some closure. And whether the person involved, the leader involved, will ever admit is probably nil. At least if we can get the truth out there, that's good.
And I'm sure you're covering all your bases legally and in terms of
Yeah, exactly.
fiction
Yeah, fully documented.
yes, yes, absolutely. I would love to talk to you about that when that is out. So please,
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about that one.
oh yeah, please keep this little podcast in mind. I would love to have you back to talk about that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you think is important for people to know about this new series by accident, Most Strange, and its books?
So, whilst the characters and the topic of the thriller are very thriller orientated, I mean, they pander to that genre, to, people who just read all of that stuff. It does pander to that. But behind the scenes, it doesn't change my thinking about the way that we need to balance the psyche for a whole, to live a whole life. And I've got a little quote here that from Carl Jung, which you almost never see it. It's buried deep in his autobiography of sorts. Well, it's not really a full autobiography, but Memories, Dreams, Reflections. It's a great book, by the way. If you want to find out about who Carl Jung really was, then Memories, Dreams, Reflections is the book to read. And he says in there that everything in the unconscious mind seeks outward manifestation. Everything.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It wants expression.
Yeah.
So that was his thought about you either cooperate with it, give it a voice, or you suppress it. But either way, it won't stop your unconscious part of your mind from wanting to manifest what it feels and thinks. And so that was definitely a real encouragement for me writing this thriller. And then he says, to counterpose that, the personality too desires to evolve out of its unconscious conditions and to experience itself as a whole. So Jung had this theory that both sides of the psyche, the conscious psyche that's in operation right now as you and I are talking, and the unconscious psyche, the agendas and motivations that are running right now as well, which we're not even conscious of, both of those things want expression. But the personality, the ego, if you like, that we've created and developed also wants to experience itself as a whole. So quite often people get to middle age. This whole midlife crisis, you don't hear people talking about it very much. Carl Jung was a big believer in the midlife crisis. He didn't ever call it that, but he said that up until midlife, the psyche is basically learning. You're a student. You're assessing the world, you're assessing yourself, you're assessing the people around you. You're slowly coming to conclusions. You're slowly able to decide who you are and so on and so forth. But the downside of that, one of the alternative sides of that, is that the persona, the personality that you've probably created as a result of that, suddenly becomes no longer fit for purpose. It doesn't work anymore. I can testify to that. And when I was 40 years old, that's when I met Paulo. And that was a critical moment for me because I'd spent my whole life working in publishing, but I didn't want to work in publishing anymore. But that was the persona, that was who I was. And so it was a really critical moment for me to be able to pivot and shift. And he helped that. In the beginning of my book, I say he actually did some magic because he is a magician. My skeptical side still struggles with that a bit, but that's okay because it worked. Whatever he did on my behalf for being so enthusiastic about his book really was a sea change, massive sea change, a completely different life. I met some people recently who only knew me before Paolo, and they said, "Oh my goodness, you've done what?" Are you the same guy? And I said, well, no, probably. No, no, I don't think I am. No, that guy I used to be didn't work anymore.
Right. Yes. So you stepped into something new and departure from what you were doing before to start trying your hand at fiction. It sounds like this book is going to do absolutely great. It's already on Kindle, but it's coming out very soon on paperback. We're recording this mid-September, and by the end of September 2024, it'll be out probably before this episode is out.
Oh, great.
Wonderful. And that can be found on Amazon. And I'm sure you'll be offering it on your website as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, you'll be able to.
Again?
colmholland.com.
colmholland.com. We'll put that in the show notes. And I'm looking at this now. There's already the book, the shop, all of the pertinent links are there where we can find both your thriller and the secrets of the alchemist, or the secret of the alchemist. So thank you again so much for joining me today. This has been wonderful. And I'm serious, when this book on the cult comes out, I would love to see you again.
You'll be the first to know. Don't worry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I wish you so much success on this new book and the subsequent books in the series. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Today.
Thanks for having me on, Christy. Appreciate it.
Don't know what to watch next? Decisions. Well, we've got some suggestions. You can click this little video here and watch that. It's something that we think you're going to like. If you like the last one, you're going to like that one too. You can also click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then you'll get notifications whenever we have a new video up. Win-win, right?